Here's a sneak peek from today's episode.
Storytelling is something that is transformative for an individual, but also for an organization, for a business, for a consumer. Storytelling, what it does is it communicates to someone emotionally, right? It gets you in a way that logic doesn't. It's really two sides of the brain, but when you tell a great story, you can feel heard, you can feel seen, you can feel moved. And I think a lot of times businesses, they forget that, especially on the product side, especially on the higher education side. And they're focused so much on specific of the product. They're so focused on, here's what a higher education master's program does, and here's the format, or here's your car, and you get great steering capacity, whatever. But essentially, you're not speaking emotionally.
Welcome to the Content Amplified podcast, brought to you by Masset. Our goal is to help you get more from your marketing content. Each episode is a 10 to 15 minute interview with industry experts that share amazing insights to help you squeeze as much juice from your content as you possibly can. Here's today's interview.
Welcome back to another episode of Content Amplified, and today we have a special episode where we have two guests, Joe and Daniel. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Great to be here.
Absolutely. I love it. Well, we're going to dive right into introductions. Joe, let's start with you. You were on the episode before. You've been on the podcast. Love to hear your introduction. Daniel, right after Joe, and then we'll dive into the subject for today.
Yeah, since I've been on the podcast and really enjoyed the experience, I'll keep mine short. I'm the founder of Campbell Learn. We're a agency that focuses on higher education marketing. What we really try to solve for is enrollment challenges, program differentiation, but really it's about storytelling and how narrative can drive success in the online higher education space and similar verticals. That's a little bit about Campbell Learn. I'll turn it over to Daniel.
I'm Daniel Liebeskind. I am the co-founder and CEO of Topia.io, and I am a software engineer by training. I've long been also a video gamer and fascinated by the stories that we tell, the collaborative stories that we tell, multiplayer experiences. And so the platform that I've built most recently is a way for people to collaborate, create journeys, integrate their existing curriculum and content, and turn them into multiplayer stories and experiences that they can have meaningful conversations, form core memories, become friends. And so, that's what we're doing.
I love it. Perfect. Daniel, I just noticed your last name. It's German for like favorite child. Is that right?
There are many interpretations. Favorite child, love child. I sometimes say that it's kind of like Jon Snow. So I'm like Daniel Snow, Liebeskind. I'm not entirely sure. Even the pronunciation is different within my family. So a lot of speculation.
Very fun. I just saw that. I was like, man, you could just claim you're the favorite child. That's awesome. I love it right there. That's great. All right. Today we're going to focus on storytelling. And at the very beginning, we'll kind of dive into a little bit about what it is and why it's important. And obviously, I feel like everyone has a different definition here. So I think it'll be good background to hear from both Joe and Daniel about this. But like Daniel mentioned, the way we tell stories is getting very different. And that's where we're going to spend the majority of the time today and use Joe and Daniel's expertise here. But to really kick this off and kind of get to know the both of you, why is storytelling so important? Why do we care? Why are there so many books about this? Why do we actually care about storytelling?
I will kick us off here. So, my perspective is that humans have evolved as storytellers. It's in our DNA. It's part of how we form civilization. We have shared beliefs, which are based on the stories that we've handed down. Before we could write, it was all verbal. Then we started writing stories down. Fast forward to now, we have much more modern devices for storytelling. Things like Netflix, streaming content, YouTube, all of these are structured as stories. They have a first act, a second act, a third act, and they pull people in. There's often some kind of conflict, and then there's a resolution, right? So this arc of the story is baked into how we interact with each other, how we socialize with each other. I think it's really one of the things that technology both can do, and one of the risks of technology, is losing some of the arc of the story, right? And not meeting people where they are in their desire to go on this journey, this experiential journey, right? Because stories really can be an experience. And so that also is an opportunity for us, even in the age of AI, is to keep in mind that we want to meet people where they are. We want to keep the human element, that stories are, again, baked into our DNA. They're part of our evolution, and they're really important going into the future.
I love that. So, Joe, a kind of a follow-up there. I love that definition from Daniel, and I do agree. Stories are a big part of who we are. If you think about children, and as I see my own kids learn, they tell stories to themselves, and that's how they learn and understand. And I think we do. How does that relate to business and not just entertainment from your perspective? In your bio intro, you mentioned that, especially like in the higher ed space, but how does storytelling really kind of have a role in business?
Yeah, and I think this is where Daniel and I really connect, because storytelling is something that is transformative for an individual, but also for an organization, for a business, for a consumer. And I think, kind of riffing off what Daniel said a little bit, storytelling, what it does is it communicates to someone emotionally, right? It gets you in a way that logic doesn't. It's really two sides of the brain, but when you tell a great story, you can feel heard, you can feel seen, you can feel moved. And I think a lot of times businesses, they forget that, especially on the product side, especially on the higher education side. And they're focused so much on specific of the product. They're so focused on, here's what a higher education master's program does, and here's the format, or here's your car, and you get great steering capacity, whatever. But essentially, you're not speaking emotionally, and you're not winning someone over. And I think that's so true in business, especially on the marketing side, especially when you're trying to sell something. There's so much competition. There's so little space for your product, your ideas, and your brand, that you can cut through the noise by connecting with the story. Like what Daniel said, it speaks to you in your DNA. And I think that you have to do that as a business today. If you're selling something, if you're trying to make a connection and you're not telling stories, that affects your cost per acquisition. That affects your revenue. That affects your team internally. That affects your lifetime value. So from a business perspective, if you're not doing storytelling, and then don't even get me started on AI and chat, you have to find a way to get yourself to be seen uniquely in the market for all of these different purposes now, not just winning the consumer, but being seen. So if you're a business and you're not doing storytelling, you're in big trouble. And that leads to, if you're not changing your technology and your experiences for that story, and that's something we can get into later, but I think that's really key too, is it's not just storytelling anymore. It's the mechanics of that storytelling.
I love it. So let's dive into the next part, because I think this is really fascinating. How we tell stories is drastically changing as time goes on. You both have mentioned AI. That's going to play a big role. But what other technologies are really changing the paradigm when it comes to, really sharing and giving people an experience with our story and putting them in the story? What's out there that people may not have considered before that they really need to have on their radar?
I'm gonna let the expert in technology go first here.
Yeah, it's a really good question, Ben. And I don't know that I'm going to necessarily recommend specific tools, but I think paradigm, the paradigm of being able to be part of the story of technologies like Topia, right? Even things like Roblox, AI technologies, all of these things, what they're really enabling is the democratization of the ability to craft and personalize the story and to be part of the story. And so tools like Topia enable people to collaboratively inject their content, their ideas into the multiplayer story experience. Tools like AI make it possible to personalize the narrative to your company, to experiences that you've had in your past, and inject them into an existing framework. It was really hard 20 years ago to do any of these things. If you had an idea for a story, you could write it down on paper. Building an actual technology or a video game or a digital experience based on that story was really, really difficult. Now it's pretty easy. We have a lot of tools like Topia that enable you to do that. And then, even writing a story based on an existing framework, a story arc, personalizing it, making it your own, making it about your business, making it fun and exciting and captivating. that was also very difficult. And so this new paradigm that we're entering into not only makes it really easy to do it, but it also, as Joe is pointing out, there's sort of a competitive imperative to take advantage of these tools because everybody's competitors are. And so we're finding ourselves in a moment right now where you may or may not be using these things and your competitors may or may not be using these things. Those that are getting an advantage. But 2 years from now, if you don't have the capabilities internally to craft narratives and create stories and make them engaging, make them multiplayer experiences even, where you can not just disseminate them to your leads and to your customers, but have them be able to interact with your content in ways that were never possible before, that's coming, right? Like we're right on the edge of that. And it's going to be critical to business, to sales and marketing and customer success, to lead gen, all of these things.
I think that's why Daniel and I connected, why we wanted to join your podcast, because we both recognized this wave. And this wave, a lot of people were like, yeah, it's not coming for a while. Virtual reality, augmented reality, spatial computing, gimmicky right now, whatever. Well, you take like higher education, for example, or, K through 12. I think it's really important for these institutions to stop thinking about it as 10 years out, but really thinking about the groundwork today. How do we, because it's coming, these users and consumers, they want to feel a part of that story in their learning environment. And it reminds me a lot of John Malkovich and comic books in some ways. When you think about John Malkovich being John Malkovich, that great movie, you go into his mind and you go into his world and you embody that. I feel like, what a consumer wants today is to seamlessly feel that story. And I think that relates to spatial computing, virtual reality, is that instead of having fragmented experiences. So take online learning. You go to an online classroom, you do some work here, you're kind of fragmented all through it out. But the future with spatial computing and virtual reality, I think that kind of schism between your online world, your virtual world, and your actual physical world, it's going to be gone. And that world is really exciting. So creating experiences and ways of thinking that get us there, get these institutions to be thinking about it, and thinking about storytelling as a digital experience that transcends your physical location is unbelievably exciting. What that world is going to look like, I think there's people like Daniel shaping it, and us want to be a part of it. So that's my kind of response to your question.
I love that. And it reminds me of the book Ready Player One,
Yeah.
right? And there's opportunities inside of this virtual world to experience a movie in a completely different way. You actually play as a character in the movie and see it firsthand. And in this, the rewarded points for how many lines they get correct and things of that nature. But it's true. Like it's a completely different perspective, not just on new stories, but re-experiencing some of these old stories. Imagining sitting, courtside in virtual reality to some of the greatest basketball games ever played that you may have only seen from a weird perspective before or something like that. So I love that. It feels like the entertainment industry is probably going to lead the way and businesses are going to follow? Or do you think that businesses are going to follow and maybe entertainment's going to be a laggard in this space? What are your predictions there?
Well, I think entertainment's already led the way. I don't look at this as like immersive storytelling or collaborative storytelling is not here and we're waiting for a Ready Player One like dystopian outcome, honestly. Ready Player One is a dystopian story of the world basically collapsing and people having to retreat into VR as really the only social construct and the way to have jobs. So that's not what any of us should be trying to get towards. Instead, it's a gradual progression, right? So we have the entertainment industry with World of Warcraft and Roblox and these kinds of large-scale, massive multiplayer online role-playing games. Now, role-playing game is really critical there because what that means is you're taking a role and you're telling a story together with other people, right? That's what MMORPGs have been for decades now, right? So the entertainment really has led the way. What we're hypothesizing here, and what we're already seeing, frankly, is that the idea of MMORPG can transcend into the business world and allow people to collaboratively take roles like they have in their company and experience things together and learn together and go on adventures, right? And turn business into something that is more accessible, more fun, more integrated. I'll also just say that there's going to be different waves of this. So if you look at like Crossing the Chasm, right, the book, they talk about the innovators, early adopters, early majority, so on. So when any technology has similar adoption waves to that, and so you see the innovators and the early adopters of these kinds of technologies often being the younger generation, right? And so when you look at, if you're trying to sell into Gen Z and Gen A, right, which are like current kids, then you need to meet them where they want to be. And right now, where they want to be is inside of immersive storytelling applications, even things like Snapchat and Instagram, but Roblox, all of these things are highly stimulating, highly engaging. And so if we are imagining that the way that they're going to work as they grow up is going to be to retreat away from these highly engaging, highly multiplayer, stimulating experiences into, basically Web 2 non-interactive single-player experiences. I just don't think that that's going to be the case. So this gradual progression happens as we have generational change and generational transformation, and that's what's happening.
And as Daniel mentioned, it's happening in entertainment, and he's seeing it happen in so many different locations. Let's take a place where it's not happening. Higher education. Right. Higher education is a great example, usually far behind, other industries. And they're in trouble if they don't start, grasping with this. There's so many upstart companies providing different education experiences. And we're still in that kind of a static mindset. You do see some universities like, Rowan University with ASU, partnering for, cinematic storytelling and virtual reality. You see a school like St. Augustine, their University of St. Augustine for Health Sciences using VR in training healthcare providers. So you're seeing, universities do some of this, and you're seeing a company like Victory XR and of course Topia, who is working with higher education. But what happens is that you get so far behind what a consumer is thinking, and if you don't take the steps, you're going to be behind that massive wave, and that's when higher education should be really scared of disruption. Because it's already happening without some of this immersive technology, without thinking about this. And we got to start, really thinking forward here, even though some of them might think it's too early. It's not.
Yeah, I love those viewpoints. I love this concept of looking at the generation that your consumer is and really focusing on that. Like you mentioned, higher education, these are people that are 18 years old when they're just starting out this experience. And what generation are they? How are they expecting to experience and interact with this kind of business or organization, institution, and really going through that, and then also adapting to other platforms and things like that. So I don't know. I love this. This has got a lot of wheels turning. This is super cool. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but Daniel and Joe, thank you for the insights. This is amazing. If anyone wants to reach out and connect with either of you online, how and where can they find you?
So my platform is topia.io. You can find me there, info@topia.io. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Daniel Liebeskind, CEO of Topia. Love to connect with anybody.
Yeah, you can find me at campbelllearn.com or on LinkedIn, just Joseph Lappin. And I think Daniel and I are always open for a conversation. It's these two worlds coming together, I think, can do really special things, in a lot of different industries. So I really appreciate your time, Benjamin.
Love it. Well, thank you both for your time. All of the links to their profiles and websites will be in the show notes below for anyone listening. Joe, Daniel, thank you so much for your time and insights today.
Thanks for having us, Ben.
Thank you for listening to the Content Amplified podcast. Please subscribe and leave us a review. And for additional ways to get more out of your content, visit our website at getmasset.com. That's getmasset.com. And tune in next time to the Content Amplified podcast.